Welcome to the Nomad Futurist podcast, where ideas shape the future and visionaries redefine what's possible. Join us as we dive deep into the evolution of technology, society, and human potential, spotlighting the voices driving change and reimagining our world. Connect with us and join us at media.nomadfuturist.org. The future is a story we write together. Let's kick it off. Here are your hosts, Phil and Nabil. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabil Mahmood, calling in from Waikoloa, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Philip Koblenz from Montclair, New Jersey.
And I'm Rebecca Weekly, and I'm calling in from Redwood City, best town in California, climate best by government test.
Wow, brilliant. And she can sing and rhyme.
Are you running for mayor of Redwood City?
Not at all. I have no
Not
interest
yet.
in any elected position ever, but I am very pro my town. It's a good.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I believe, Phil, and you were talking about earlier that you guys probably met, 15 years ago or something like that?
It feels like 15 years. I think there was a line at OCP. You were at OCP, right? So in one of the keynotes, they mentioned that the last year has been the most impactful decade in computing. That was like one of the takeaway lines. So I think it was 15 years ago because it was a year and a half ago when I saw Rebecca on the stage at AFCOM. And I'm like, we need to get her on the podcast. And look, a short 15 years later, we're able to make it happen.
So we have officially surpassed the cat years tenure into something else.
Certainly more than dog years, no doubt.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us. Lovely to have you. You and I have had the opportunity of speaking at several panels together as well. It's always fun. But before we get started, could you share at a high level with our audience, who is Rebecca Weekly and what do you do?
So who is Rebecca Weekly is probably a longer and not necessarily topical for the podcast. But what do? I run infrastructure at GEICO, and that might seem like GEICO, little gecko, great car ads. What do you mean? What is infrastructure here? And that's actually a good question for anybody who works in infrastructure because no two companies are alike when it comes to infrastructure. But for me, it means that for everything that we own, every site that we own, I own power, cooling, connectivity. I own all of the logical assets and physical assets at those locations. We have 349 offices if you think through all of our GEA sites, our staff council sites, our regional offices, our branch offices, et cetera, and our data centers. So I own all of our data centers, which are a combination of owned and operated, as well as co-location facility. And I also have our cloud presence. So we're across many different clouds. When I got here, we were across all the clouds, which is not generally recommended for anybody. But we're now in two primary clouds, which is a much better state to be in because it turns out you usually pay to move your data from any one cloud to any other location, at least based on how our network was designed when I got here. So long story long.
Power hungry and network hungry and compute hungry gecko.
Yeah. Tiny little gecko. He uses a lot. So that's what I get to work on every day. So it's everything from the public cloud to the on-prem private cloud, power, cooling, connectivity at every single site and location. So it's super fun because some days I'm looking at thermal issues and how we're going to make sure we have better offline, if you want to think about it that way, right? Automated controls around all those different sites because we're not going to have people sitting around at all those different sites. And then I get to look at how do we do better auto dimming and auto scaling and ensure that our mean time to deploy is not lengthened by our cost optimization choices in the cloud.
Brilliant. Well, that's so exciting, right? But before we get into all the nitty-gritty, the technical stuff, the state of the industry and where we're headed, let's peel the onion just a bit. Where is Ria Americano? Is that in Mountain View, Redwood City?
No,
Where is this school?
I grew up in Sacramento, California. My parents still live in the house that I grew up in. It's definitely like not an engineer's town. It is absolutely the government-led hub. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people.
See why you have such a visceral reaction to the concept of running for office.
God bless the people who are willing to do that for our country. I think it's a tough job. I like to fix things every day, and large, complicated systems that do not follow any logical pattern is really an impossible task. So things that are quantitative, super exciting for me. But it was an incredible place to grow up in terms of like good public schools, safe community, lots of good people. And that's what I grew up in. So very grateful for the teachers, and I had a computer lab. I was blessed to be able to get involved early in that domain. I hung out in the computer lab. This is probably not surprising for anybody who knows me. I built my first server when I was 12, and it was not actually associated with that particular work. It was very much around kind of helping my brother and I set up a BBS service to talk through with other people we were working with in terms of developing music and trying to share tabs. And there wasn't a better way to do it at the time.
Feels like you invented the internet.
Definitely not. I'm not that old.
But the concept of engineering and computers and stuff resonated with you at an early age. Is that a consequence of what your parents did for a living?
Nope.
Did it come just out of nowhere?
It didn't come out of nowhere. So my dad's a doctor. My mom's degree is in accounting, but she didn't get it until actually I was a little kid. She had all of her kids, and I'm the youngest. And then decided to go back and finish college because she had started having kids when she was 18. So I definitely got a front row seat to continuing education and continuing to invest in yourself and come up with different strategies in life. So numbers and people were sort of fundamental, and health to my upbringing and my parents, but none of them were engineers. I think my mom tells this story. I kind of remember, but I don't fully remember. So there may be some hyperbole in it. But I was 5 or 6 when I got my first little robot. So I don't know if you remember this, but there was this little toy that was an 80s toy, and it had punch cards. We didn't know them as punch cards, but it had these little cards that you could put in its little belly, and it would say different things based on the punch card, and you could get it to say little things. And I figured out that if I changed the punch cards, I could get it to say all sorts of things it probably shouldn't have said. And that was very exciting for me. And that was sort of the start of a love affair with gadgets. And so I had, again, in the 80s, there was a lot of like see-through phones and see-through, you could buy like the encasing of plastic that was totally see-through. And those were it. Like that's what I wanted desperately, was a see-through phone. And what did I do with it? I took it apart. Did I have any interest in putting it back together? No, I didn't. So my mom was very annoyed that she bought this expensive phone. But
which is hilarious because the whole point is you can see the insides. Why did you take it apart? You could already see it.
I wanted to see what and like how it rang, and when you took it all apart, like you could. Anyway, long story long, I always seemed to want to get my hands on things. I was also somewhat nerdy, and so the crew that hung out in the computer lab were the crew that I loved. We also played a lot of Magic cards. Like this was absolutely a counterculture set of folks who were absolutely my people and still are my people. And that I think also really appealed. Like it seems very much now, computer science, AI, these are like it jobs, and people are like entrepreneurship. My mom used to say that's what people do when they're unemployed. Like this is absolutely cool now, but it really wasn't. If you really look back at like the early days of Apple or the early days, it was a counterculture movement to be into computers. And it was about democratizing intelligence and ensuring that anybody, not just larger corporations, could be empowered to change the world and to do creative things. And I loved those people, and I still love those people. And there's a large overlap with music, and I also love those people. And so it really was, I found my people in the nerds. It had nothing to do with my family. Everybody else is in medicine or dentistry or law. And it's like all about the people and the health.
So music came in from your brother's part, right? That's what it sounded like. And the tech came in from the nerds hanging out in the school.
My mom's a New Yorker. So music culture is just like, you should grow up learning another language. You should grow up learning an instrument. You should grow up having a STEAM education, not just a STEM education. You can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be an engineer. These are the acceptable things within a framing of her.
With a little sprinkling of art.
Yes. But the art is, so all of my siblings did theater or were involved in learning a larger realm of things. I think there's 12 years between my oldest sister and me. And so as my family kind of grew up, she had more time and energy to invest in these things. So I think I got exposed to more than maybe my oldest sisters did. But certainly it's a lot of focus on that as sort of a core part of culture.
So as a student going to Re-Americano, tech wasn't really a big thing
You
back
really like
then.
saying that. I
Well,
really think
it probably felt a bit off because nobody else was engaged, right? It's probably like maybe half a dozen or a dozen students that were probably hanging out. How was that experience?
I think no matter who you are in high school, you probably feel like an other, right? It's just the nature of that age that you are understanding your uniqueness and sort of somewhat embarrassed about it. We get better as we age and accepting the many layers of our onion, to go back to your first analogy. But at that time, anytime you're different stands out. And I think I'm a good chameleon in some ways, in that probably most people who hung out with me in that context thought I was pretty similar to them. So I did student government, and those people probably knew nothing about my sort of habits on the side. And I did cheerleading, and those folks were definitely not aware of, like, I remember when I got into MIT and people were like, huh? Because you kind of tend to show people what you're going to get positive reinforcement on. And every high school has every crew of people. So I kind of went between different groups wherever it felt right. And then I also had a lot of things that I was sort of personally invested in. And honestly, I look back and I think, how did I sleep? Because I did, and I really do always need to sleep, but I just kind of kept going 24/7. And that
I almost feel like we need to bring your mom
That's
onto the podcast to get an understanding of what it was like having a 24/7 go Rebecca Weekly in the house, taking apart every phone in the house and not wanting to put it back together.
she would probably describe me as an Energizer bunny.
But one of the things I try to kind of instill in my kids, the problem is the more you tell your kids how to do, the more they want to do the opposite of whatever you're telling them, because leave me alone, you don't know what you're talking about. But the concept of adaptability as a characteristic that people have, I think, is super underappreciated. And it sounds like you had it, right? You had the ability to like hang out with the geeks in the computer lab. You had the ability to switch personalities, but adapt your personality to the folks in student government, and then adapt your personality probably more significantly to the cheerleaders.
Some of whom were absolutely brilliant and went to like...
I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying you don't necessarily put those groups together, as you clearly a cheerleader ended up going to MIT and becoming a brilliant engineer from that very class. I guess the question is, what do you attribute that adaptability to? Is it having the multiple siblings in the house and being the runt of that litter, essentially, and having to make a name for yourself, or is it attributable to something else?
I think it was absolutely being the runt of the litter. There's so much when everybody already has such established personalities. You figure out how to sort of wend your way through and find your spaces that are good for you. My husband always gives me the feedback that I'm excellent at figuring out what I need and really horrible at saying what I want. Like, within this context, I need this, I'm good. And not necessarily like, oh, wouldn't that be amazing? Couldn't I go, sure, but this is pretty good. Like, and that is both a strength and a weakness, like all attributes of humans. It's a strength in that I can find excitement and interest in almost anything and do enough to take care of myself that I'm doing pretty well. Like sleep. Sleep is the key. Otherwise, everything's great. Like, I have worked in hyperscale environments where the problems we're solving are physics, right? Like speed of light kind of problems, and the memory wall and the power wall, and how do we solve these problems? And semiconductors, where it's even a deeper layer of physics in some sense. How do we actually ensure we're using every bit wisely to be able to deliver the maximum performance at the minimum power footprint, right? To insurance, where the things that we are trying to protect and the people, the infrastructure is sort of an enabler, but it's like air. People think about it when it's not there, but they don't necessarily think about it from a design or an enabling perspective, unless how to help people understand this is why this experience isn't working. And all of those angles, it's the same job. But it's how you can adapt in your communication, which some days I'm better at than others, but to the space that you are inhabiting to help people make the right decisions, right being in quotations, because everyone's truth is a wee bit different. There are facts, and use those facts to help drive outcomes that will inevitably, hopefully, make your company better, stronger, faster, more efficient. And so I actually enjoy that. Like some people, when they get into an environment that's different, chafe, right? And they feel like it's politics. Politics. You can tell I grew up in a town with politics. I think of it as an opportunity to map impact. One of my best mentors and previous bosses said was, it's not the what, it's the so what. How do you help people understand we are doing this so that you will be able to do this? And learning how to frame that in different contexts for different outcomes for a business is absolutely critical. And getting to do that in an environment where, in my current company, it's private equity. And in the infrastructure space, when you have to do investments that are non-trivial CapEx, being able to work not in a quarterly reporting kind of scenario, but with people who think in long-term investment strategies is amazing. It's an amazing opportunity to refine your communication style, but also to think through strategies that when you're in a hyperscale environment and the business is so flexible and the reporting is so quarterly, you often will make short-term decisions, not necessarily for the benefit of anything. The environment is one topic, but really short-term decisions that end up being technical debt in the future.
Concept of like leveraging your analytical mind to allow what it is the business needs and communicate it to people so that you are taking their perspective and what their needs are into account as you try to explain things that I think are probably abstract to them, but kind of connecting the dots is superpower of the highest order in whatever job anybody takes, in frankly, any vertical, because understanding human nature, I say this all the time, so much of what we do is psychology more than it is engineering, because you inevitably have to get other human beings to understand why you want to do something, and they don't necessarily have the same engineering perspective that you may have. So you are, I'm going to go back to this timeline. You are in school, a geek, a cheerleader, a politician. And then
I was the finance person. I just want to be clear.
The finance person. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Give me a spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets.
Nobody works a pivot table like Rebecca Weekly. So you are now thinking about what you want to do for a living and applying to schools. Clearly, we were not in the AI moment at that time. Compute and digital infrastructure and data centers were not what they are today or what they were even 10, 15 years ago. So what was your thought as to what you want to do for a living? What informed MIT and what were the other options? What did you see for Rebecca Weekly as a high school student applying to college?
So oddly enough, I have to go back to like 16 and say, I was always good at sort of math and science, and I really liked computers, but I hadn't been exposed to engineering as a career, as a discipline that wasn't part of sort of the vernacular of my family. So I just thought this was like a side project I enjoyed, and I hadn't really thought about it. I had a calculus teacher who was like, hey, HP, which is in Roseville, not too far from where I grew up, has this engineering awareness program. It happens for like 4 different weekends. I really think you should go. And it was a really important time. I had just taken a period of time to try and back to the weirdness of me. I had tried to sort of be a professional dancer, singer, done the whole go for it time frame, and really, really learned the hard way that there are vocations and avocations. And I love singing. I love dancing. I love all of these artsy things, but you will be basically waiting tables as an accidental outcome unless you're the power law output of this particular scenario. And boy, it's a lot easier if you're actually good at math and science to follow that path and find great ways for creative outlets in your avocations. So that lesson was hard to learn. And I felt a little lost of just like, this is the thing that I've invested so much time into in my life. And that was definitely a reset. So it was one of these very powerful teachers. And I think any person who has found any success in life probably can look back at least one, if not five, powerful teachers who changed the trajectory of their lives. And this absolutely was my person. So he was like, go, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. And so I did. I spent 4 different weekends at HP building popsicle bridges and meeting my people. And they paired us up with an engineer who was kind of our mentor through this program. And the gal who was my mentor in that, her name was Grace. She had 2 kids. She had a hybrid sort of work schedule, which seemed great because my dad had been paged like 24/7 my whole childhood, never around. Literally, my friends referred to him as the mythical beast. And so it looked like, look, this woman has a life I could want to lead. Like, she's an involved mom. She's learning every day and she's solving really cool problems. There's a job for that? Like, what? Sign me up. And that was it. Literally, that one weekend, the first one at HP, meeting this woman, looking at her life and being like, that looks great, was okay.
Was that in the senior year?
That was my junior year. So it was when I was about to sort of take all of my SATs and all of the prep and application phases.
Up until that point, you thought your path was going to be professional dancer, in the entertainment, let's call it, the sector.
Yeah. And my dad was like, no. And it was it's fine, Daddy. I will continue to think about medicine and that'll be
that's
great.
His focus is to try to get you on the medicine track, right? So
I promise I will be a perpetual student for 12 years, incur a ton of debt, and then eventually make money. I promise. And on the side, I'll just do all this other stuff and it'll be so successful that somehow I'll drop out of medical school, but you won't care. This was all in my head. It was going to be fine. And what a different trajectory from just that idea that like you would be able to perpetually learn, get paid to learn every day and solve problems for people every day. Like,
that in itself is basically a testament of what we actually been trying to do, is that hands-on experience and bringing people to the sector to kind of touch, feel, experience in person, because otherwise it's just theory, right? Nobody can connect the dots. They don't know the complexity and the interconnected nature of what we do from sitting at the sidelines.
I also think, like, as a 16, kind of 17-year-old girl, not to use 6'7" for all the kids that are listening.
Oh my golly.
6'7".
That's a 6'7", which is, by the way, dictionary.com's word of the year is 6'7". It's 6'7", which is not even a word. It's just 2 different numbers. But anyway, as a 16, 17-year-old kid, if you speak to like just your run-of-the-mill 16, 17-year-old kid right now, I'm not sure they realize how impacted their futures will be in very real terms by the experiences they're having today that they're not necessarily aware of. And I think your story will resonate incredibly because you have such a through line between this particular experience that you weren't seeking. It just kind of found you by being present. And then all of a sudden, your trajectory had changed. So you go to HP, you see this example of someone that's living a life that you could see for yourself, and you come out of that experience and you're like, I'm applying to MIT? I want to be
pretty much. I was like, okay, I need to make sure I've taken the right sort of applied domains of math and science. And so I was looking for other sort of externship kind of opportunities to just focus in on areas that I was already interested in. I applied to only engineering programs. So 2 of my siblings were at the University of Pennsylvania. So I applied to UPenn. I applied to MIT. Yeah, I was all about getting as far away from home as possible. I run to literally, my parents put me on a plane to go to college. And then they went off on like a 6-week jaunt. Like they were so done. They were finally empty nesters after 6 kids that like, peace out, friends. So I was in the same zone. Like I could feel that energy of that last year when I was the only one left. It was a totally different world than the chaos I grew up in. And I was ready to embrace the chaos of college and learning. And so CIT, MIT, and UPenn were sort of the ones that most appealed, and CIT was awfully close. So and I
Close,
applied to all the UCs as a good California kid does. And I think I would have had an incredible education there if I wanted to stay close. But as soon as MIT said yes,
And clearly, if anybody had wanted you to stay close, it sounded like they were.
and my parents absolutely love me. And like when I did come
there,
home for
right?
the first
you
Thanksgiving,
ended up coming back like a boomerang, right? You did end up coming back.
I came back as soon as I could. But it was really the opportunity to kind of, when I visited MIT as a pre-Frost, sort of post getting accepted before making the decision, that weekend was just epic. Like one of my best friends from college, I met on the bus. He was from LA. Like as we all came in to spend the weekend, and just, it's such a quirky, wonderful, and I really felt like I found my people there, like hardworking, but also wanting to find the spirit, the joy, the curiosity, the like fun in it. Like you go to a fraternity house and they've wired up the different stairs to sing at you as you walk up the stairs because they could. And that's actually not that difficult an algorithm to play with. Or somebody has like figured out before it became common how to do fractal patterns based on different musical inputs in a projector at a party. Like it's just one of these.
You're speaking like what everyone thinks of the Animal House college experience.
Totally. It's totally or True Genius or any of those moments. Like nobody actually froze the floor. But there was a day that I came home to my dorm and somebody had done a 4-story beer luge. And it was like, people were taking shots at the bottom of it and sliding off the end. It was just.
But it was just a science experiment. So
they were framed as science experiments. And these were opportunities to learn and to stay up until 2 a.m. in the common rooms talking about sort of how we would change the world.
Well, you are now. So switching gears just for a minute. So sort of like the rise of the dot-com boom in the mid-90s to the 2000s, sort of like makes sense. Okay. Everyone's sort of talking about it. It's in the news, maybe just a little bit. But then as you're getting close to graduation, boom, the bubble bursts.
Bubble burst.
Why did you stay in it?
So I think like many people who started, I started out as computer science and electrical engineering. My first work was actually in New York City at a bank, CIBC Oppenheimer, doing bond calculators using K, which is a very interesting language invented by Arthur Whitney. It's vector-based, fascinating. So very different. Everything was going to be like focused in on computer science and programming. And then the bubble started to burst and it was like, so there are these electrical engineers and they seem to still be very needed. Like I should spend a little more time learning what they do. So my first internship in that domain was actually working for Texas Instruments. And I worked on the fab floor. Well, I worked in the fab building. I wasn't on the floor unless I had to be. But that was basically
fabricating, not
fabrication facility.
Okay.
Yeah. So DMOS 6, TI at the time was making the digital light processor, which was millions of tiny little mirrors that were used to make really high-end projectors. So if you went to one of the high-end like movie theaters, they all had the TI DLPs. And they had all of these fabrication components, etchers, lithos, that were on different back-end firmware, and somebody had to automate the processes. So that was my internship gig, was to do like automation of the back-end line for the fab ops team. And it was super fun and a super ridiculous project because every single version was different. Nothing was sort of standardized, but really got to kind of get into the lower level of the stack, working in firmware, working with different devices. All of my like nerdy robotics love got to be fed, but it was still programming, but it was sort of with very physical outputs on a very like clear use case. So if you made the line go faster, you won. If there were times when things broke less often, you won. So everything was very almost like a video game of how do we make this thing run better and help the people in the fab stay productive and have higher yield. And unlike when I was working on a bond calculator, and I felt like a lot of the software that I worked on was, we want you to do this. And then, oh, wait, you're going to be gone in 2 weeks. Why don't you just finish it this way? And that happens a lot more, I think, in the software space than it does in the hardware space. Because when you have a tangible output that people can see, they kind of realize you can't just start all over again and throw it away. The analogy I sometimes use is like when you build a bridge, like if you are doing structural engineering for a bridge and it's designed to be a suspension bridge, nobody's going to come in and say, gosh, we're 2 years over budget and 2 years over time and twice the budget. Why don't you just make it a causeway? Like that just makes it more expensive and take longer. And
we do have that example.
Oh, do you?
The bridge from nowhere in Alaska.
Exactly. Like when you have those, people can grok that that's not going to be the way to make it go faster. Like just finish the project the way you needed to finish it. Maybe you will leave off some of the embellishments, but you got to finish the project the way it is. In software, that never works. Like people have this concept that if we simplify, it'll make it easier rather than we just start it all over again because 90% of what you had isn't applicable in the simpler design. It may very well be the right choice, but it has led to wanting to do more of an agile methodology in development so that we don't have to incur the costs, get 90% of the way through it, and then start all over again. And that just drove me crazy. I think it's the accountant mother. Like, there's no way that I want to waste time or money doing something wrong. I'd rather do a little thing, run the water through the pipes, figure out if we're doing the right thing or not with real data, and then double down once we've got positive trajectory. And hardware was much more focused on it because if a project takes 18 months and once you send it off to a fab, like it's in production for 6 months.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and the CapEx is millions and millions and millions of dollars. You measure twice, you cut once, you're really, really, really specific.
It's much more long-term thinking, right? It's you think about it from an investment vehicle perspective, you have like traditional private equity and then you have these infrastructure funds. And by definition, one has like a 3 to 5 year time horizon and the other is looking for 10 or 15 or 20 year potential recapitalization because of just the expectation that it takes time, not just to build, but also to realize the benefit of the infrastructure investments that you're making. And I always go back to that thing that you said earlier, which is like, it's all the same job. Like it's all the same. All you're doing is like shifting that kind of analytical mind towards these other outcomes. And I think, well, look, obviously these opportunities came to you from MIT, but I think that 6 or 7 year old that was taking apart that phone, it's that same, you're doing that same job. It's just, you are just a more mature person with more perspective associated with your kind of lived experience to that point. But that's always been there. It's always been you. It's almost not a learned thing.
But now she's putting it together, not just leaving on the table.
Generally, I don't get to leave it broken. That's a bad form.
Right. Well, now you've got people to put them back together. It's a nice thing about success.
There's a reason why I ended up in verification because I'm like, I'm good at breaking things. Like, let me try and break your thing.
So let John Hill put it back together.
Yeah. So now you are in a very much open niche. The data center is not really at the forefront at this point in time. Could you walk us through that journey as how you got from working for organizations like Silicon Graphics or others into the data center segment?
How do we get from the fabrication?
I know I went
or the punch card monkey.
I love it. I love the I still get when I go to the Computer History Museum and I see the punch card systems. I'm like,
it's on my desk.
See, if you had gone to Penn, I could have put you through ENIAC, which was like the original.
It really was the original. So when I came out, again, there's always pluses and minuses of not having sort of family experience in a domain. I very much followed my feet. I very much followed my gut with people. So did a banking thing and obviously worked on the computer science side of that. Then I did fabrication facility and the software components, really firmware components of that. My third internship was actually at Silicon Graphics. And the culture of Silicon Graphics was like nothing I had ever seen. Definitely not Wall Street. It was definitely not Texas Fab. It was my first sort of exposure to a high-tech company. And there was a massive lab. And if you walked into the lab and said, what's that? Somebody would spend 2 hours walking you through, like, you've not played with this kind of logic analyzer? Let me tell you all about it. Or somebody had like a soldering iron out to do various things and be like, what's that part? I haven't seen that part. And they're like, you have not played with the JTAG interface? Okay, let's go show you how you can sniff all of this. Like, you have no idea. We can hack with this. We can do all sorts of things, especially if the debug pins haven't been pinched. Like, all sorts of, like, these were my people. Like, they were just uber nerds in the best of ways, coming at it from genuine curiosity. There were also clots on the side because when we were in the middle of a bring up, like, nobody left the lab. So it was just a fascinating cultural team. And I met an incredible group of really mentors and leaders there. So when I was making my decision of like where to go for a job, I had a pre-IPO offer on the Google search side to work on a Google search appliance, which honestly, that team ended up not going anywhere, but it was pre-IPO Google, and SGI, which was unfortunately a dinosaur that was dying. And I had no idea from a context perspective that it was dying. I just loved the people. And I went to where I had done my internship and worked with incredibly brilliant people on Numalink architecture and FPGA accelerators that were on that coherent mesh fabric, working with tiny little processors, right? The MIPS processors. And it was just, I think what I loved about that company and that team and just everything about it was they had every component. They had high-speed I/O, they had coprocessors, they had this coherent mesh fabric. So tiny processors, a lot of what we do now in a distributed sort of SoC, they were doing as a server configuration in data centers at that time. And it was just a genuinely fantastic place to learn. All the managers were in cubicles and all the engineers were in offices because we had to focus and they should be accessible. Just every part of the culture of that company was
like the mirror image of finance.
It was like nothing hierarchical, speak truth to power. Like, how do we make sure the outcomes speak and our customers are central? And I loved the company. Clearly, it was a horrible choice. I should have gone to Google, but I had zero regrets because of how much I learned there. When I finally started feeling like a professional cockroach, 9 consecutive quarters of layoffs. And at first I was like, oh, they must trust me so much now I have these projects. Oh, they must trust me so much now I have these projects. And then I realized, oh no, I'm cheap and they can't afford to keep the other people. So I'm just getting overworked and really was sleeping in the cots more often than not. I finally said, okay, I think maybe I need to start looking at the financials of the companies I consider and educate myself a little bit more on like what a PDE ratio is and what would be a good place to spend my career. I didn't do that particularly well. I went over to ATI right before it got bought by AMD because it really screwed up.
By the way, would that have worked as an analysis point? Hindsight being 2020, yes, of course. Google, you get all that pre-IPO stock. But if you look at it from a PE ratio perspective, would Google have? No, at that time, SGI would have won anyway, right? So
yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't have known what to look for even. I do advise people now as they think about like their personalities and they're thinking about their company, don't just think about the culture that you're involving yourself in, although a lot of people forget that part. Also think about the health of the company, because the hardest part is if you're constantly being churned, and that's a combination of strategy and success, plus the culture of how people think about learning and growing others and contributing to technical outcomes. So I did not make a good choice at all. HCI was also a great company, and a lot of the graphics folks from SGI had gone there. And so that was why it felt like a good spot to land. And I got to work on the Wii, which was awesome. So before the Wii was there, I got to work on the graphics chip that was designed by ATI. And so I still have a little Wii that says property of design team Rebecca Lapon, my maiden name. And that was like a really cool project to work on. But the company ended up getting acquired by AMD because we couldn't cut it ourselves due to some very interesting memory verification choices that happened and made us miss our bring up. And so after that, I was like, okay, no, seriously, you got to get serious, because if you don't look at these companies and their health, you're going to constantly iterate on what you want to do. And so I actually went into like the blue chip of all semiconductor, which is electronic design automation tools, which is a great combination of software and hardware. Like you can't get any closer to the core of that. It's the software used to lay out the hardware. And that company was private. pretty small, 1,000 people when I joined. And it was the liberal arts education of semiconductors. Like, because there's only really two companies. Mentor Graphics was also in the game at that time. They're no longer. They're part of Siemens now. But Synopsys and Cadence are the only two big companies. And big was 1,000 people. So very approachable. And they work with everybody, right? Work with processor
So you're not beholden
companies.
to one. You don't have to pick a winner because everybody's using them.
Exactly. And so you get to see how everybody does design and layout and validation and verification and continue to iterate on improving those processes and methodologies to make. So I spent 8 years at Synopsys. I loved it. I loved working. I did everything, every part of applications engineering you could possibly do. And then eventually I had the opportunity to go into more of the product management side of that company, and then eventually into Intel's product management side. And while I have always come back to engineering because that's really the heart, those two stints in more of the marketing, management, product management side were very good for getting clear on that. So what, right? What am I building? Why? What is it going to do? And helping people understand what it does for them so that we could have more successful. And I think if I hadn't experienced the 9 quarters of consecutive cockroach feelings, I would not necessarily have known, okay, if you can't describe why what you're working on is critical and get people on board, it doesn't matter if you're a great engineer, you're going to have a lot of canceled projects and it's going to suck.
Well,
So
you see that a lot with AI now. You see people that are like super excited about the technology of it and then realizing that the real money to be made is on focusing on the outcomes. Like, what are people going to actually do with this cool stuff? I think that it's one of those things that people are learning in many cases the hard way. It sounds like you learn, look, life is a series of experiences that end up building your perspective, which is ultimately your value to all of these companies. So it's amazing to see that at this kind of early part of your career, you kind of understanding like what this trajectory is teaching you. You probably didn't know it at the time.
I just didn't want to keep feeling like, oh my God, this company are they going to be able to pay my paycheck next week? Like, I probably should choose someone a little healthier.
Well, obviously you made the right decisions and are in the right place now. If you were to look back or tell the younger Rebecca Weekly based on what's today and based on where we are at as a sector and the future that we can see or forecast to a degree, what would you tell yourself, or what would be that one message that you would want to share?
Stay curious.
Hang out with the nerds too.
Hang out with the nerds.
Hang out with the nerds.
It is absolutely who you surround yourself with and where you focus your energy that defines your outcome, especially in the world of AI. I love that you brought it up, Philip. Like, the critical thinking skills you develop are so much more important. The research, the sort of aggregation of data, the sort of summarization, these things are all becoming rote, right? Because AI can do it for you. But it will make interesting conclusions that may or may not be correct. It's like the easy button. And continuing to ensure you are looking in to the data and understanding why and questioning it, that is what is going to distinguish you from all the other kids who are using AI assistive tools. Like, you have to turn it off and make sure you understand first principles and make sure you can unpack what you just read and make sure you can communicate what it is in a cogent, concise fashion. And those skills are generally from and persistence. And if there's anything I worry about for this generation is that it's so easy to amass this information and take it as true. And often it is not. These LLMs hallucinate. You must use your brain, question authority, question the way it comes across so that you can be impactful. Otherwise, we'll all just become lemmings at whatever dystopic reality has the AI tools running the universe.
Well, I feel like it's one of those reasons why we just have not, this generation is at a disadvantage because they didn't get the exposure to the kind of pre-digital world where they had to find phones to take apart as opposed to just watch videos of other people taking phones apart.
I get that, but I felt in my time that I missed out on the 60s. right? Because they got to be at the ground floor of the inception of all of this. And how could you, like, a page fault was literally like the page couldn't come across the top. It was a mechanical failure. Like, so many of the analogies that define the industry came from the ENIACs. And I felt like I was at a disadvantage. I think every generation does think, oh, it must have been easier when it was simpler. And it was probably in some ways. And it was incredibly hard because nobody knew what could be done. And now we know what can be done. But can you orient back to how and what and why is that?
Well, but understanding the history of it is super important, right? So you have to be like a super nerd to like want to even care about the history of like how we got to where we are. I'm going to end with one question that's probably a really long one that we should have brought up earlier, but we talk about curiosity and persistence, which I think are two hugely important and underappreciated things, just like that adaptability that we talked about earlier. And I'm conscious of the fact that you left school, you came into finance, and then you pivoted to engineering, both industries that are underrepresented today by women and certainly were more so back then. And did you find any difficulty? Is there any characteristic that you had, maybe outside of those, in being a woman, being taken seriously on the fabrication floor, or based on the culture of these organizations? Were they more open to it?
I think every time you are the 1%, the 10%, the sub 20%, you carry a mental load of, I am different. I think maybe I was lucky in that I grew up in a very female-centric household, right? 5 of the sibs are girls. And so it never occurred to me as a young person that it was a disadvantage to be a girl.
Big Mel was a mythical beast, right? So
yeah, exactly. So that helped. And then I think as I stepped into these spaces, it was more of a liability early. And I think that's something I always try and help the people I mentor in this space understand, that being an outlier early, the hardest part is your own mental load. Worry less about what they think of you or that you think differently. Worry more about just asking the question. Because if you have a question, 5 other people in the room probably do. Don't think, I'm the only woman. If I ask a question, will I look stupid? No, just ask it. Just ask it and come from genuine curiosity, come from a desire to have the right outcomes. Make it clear that that's why you're asking. If I had things to do over again, I probably would have made different choices about some of the choices.
Google stock options probably are
Sure. But I think you can only be you, and you got to apologize less for who you are and focus more on what you can accomplish, and just keep doing that and you will make it through. And at this stage in my life, I feel like it's actually an advantage to be a woman and to have the forced empathy to think in styles that were not natural to me, that I had to achieve through my 20s, working in an environment where I was absolutely the minority. Now, as I work with very different personalities, it contributed to that adaptability component, because of course I had to figure out how to make sure everyone who was not like me could see my perspective. And that was a forced requirement for my communication. And now I think it makes me a better leader. I think it makes it easier for me to work with others. And certainly it makes it easier for me to communicate to investors, finance folks, totally different environments. Why we need to consider the protocol that we speak on for my networking. Like, that is Greek, but can you help break it into ways that they can digest it? Absolutely. They're brilliant people. It's just finding the analogy that helps them understand my weird world in the context of the outcomes, the return on investment, the solutions that it will drive for our company.
Brilliant. Well, this has been absolutely amazing. I think my key takeaway is believe in yourself. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I think we probably might want to do an episode 2 of this. You're absolutely amazing. And on that note, welcome to Nomad Futurist. Great to have you on board as one of our ambassadors.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
You come away from some of these recordings thinking, is this going to be a good episode? Is it not going to be a good episode?
Yeah.
How is it going to read? I think this is one that's going to be super impactful and played for generations to come about. I'm telling you, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. This is a TED Talk of how to go from feeling like the weird one to just owning your weirdness and just being you against all odds. So I love it. You are perfect for Nomad Futurist. You are
Hey,
I'm
very passionate about this
what
space.
this society needs, notwithstanding your inability to want to lead it as a politician.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Redwood City.
You guys are one. Bye.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you for joining us on the Nomad Futurist podcast. Remember, technology, markets, and challenges will continue to evolve, but those who adapt and prepare are the ones who will thrive. Embrace the change, stay curious, and let's build a future worth moving towards. The journey has just begun, and we're glad you're here with us. Visit us anytime at media.nomadfuturist.org to stay connected and be a part of the movement. Until next time, keep exploring.